The Pressers with Matt Mallory and Clint Necro. Brought to you by Public Safety and Education and the Trigger Pressers Union.
This episode is brought to you by Mantis. Mantis X helps shooters suck less. Next Level Training, the makers of the CERT pistol. Mike Hughes and Britt Lentz are rock stars, and you can be too if you train with a CERT. TheGunfood.com, your online source for ammunition. Mountain Man Medical, the right medical training and gear should be accessible to every American. Meet the Pressers is also generously supported by other fine companies, ranges, and our Patreon members. Thank you.
Hello, this is Meet the Pressers. I'm Matt Mallory, and this is my awesome guest co-host, Cheryl Todd. And we have a very special guest, Mr. Dr. John Lott. Dr. Lott has wrote many books, More Guns, Less Crime, The War on Guns, Gun Control Myths, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, and Cheryl's got them all right there, and many more accolades. Doc, what did I miss? What else should we talk about?
I don't know. Whatever you want to talk about. So,
I
love the words behind you. Who said that? Judge Napolitano. John Lott is the most dogged, intellectually credible academic defender of the right to keep and bear arms in the United States today. I could not say that any better, but how awesome that you have that quote. But so earned, John. Holy cow, you are tirelessly working, and there's always such an onslaught of garbage information, like garbage statistics, that then you have to wade back into and try to make sense of yet again. I can't imagine that after Uvalde, the Texas murders at that elementary school, that things got any less busy for you. Did that one particularly impact the work you do?
well, I suppose they all do. I mean, that was obviously gut-wrenching, but I think the thing that's just frustrating is just how you had yet another mass public shooting in a gun-free zone. Mm-hmm. And the media just refuses to go and deal with it. The Buffalo shooting was also depressing because, here you even had the guy, another person in their manifesto explained why he picked the particular target that he did, that he wanted to go to a target where he knew victims didn't have concealed handguns, where they weren't able to protect themselves. Yep. And the media just, they wanted to go and paint him a particular way, but it's like they couldn't even accurately read or completely read his manifesto. I mean, he spends a great deal of time talking about why he wanted to pick the target that he did, and they completely ignore it. So, but that's nothing unusual. I mean, if you go to our website at crimeresearch.org, we've collected dozens of cases where these mass murderers have explained in their diaries or in manifestos or in other places why they picked the targets that they do. And the media just refuses to do it. I have to say, what's gotten even more depressing is just how complicit the media is in these attacks, in the sense that, I'm not going and arguing we need to get rid of the First Amendment, but anybody who reads these guys' statements knows that their goal is to get media attention. They keep on saying, if I can only kill more people than such and such did, right, I can get even more media attention. And they know that the way to get more media attention is to go and kill more people. And so they try to go to places where they know victims can't defend themselves, but the media gives them the attention. The media refuses to go and talk about what really could be used to go and stop these attacks.
The mental aspect of them.
And You know, to me, what stops these attacks is if you can take away their ability to go and kill lots of people. And the way you take away their ability to go and kill lots of people is by having somebody there who can quickly be on the scene with a gun to stop them, particularly somebody with a concealed handgun. You know, the other thing that the Buffalo shooting illustrated was there was an armed guard there, but and a lot of the gun control people will say, see, this proves that a good guy with a gun can't stop the attack. What they need to understand and refuse to understand is that having one guard there or one police officer in uniform is an almost impossible task. You put somebody in uniform there, it's essentially, you might as well put a neon sign above them that says, shoot me first, because the murderers know that if they go and kill that one person first, they're going to have free reign to go after other people that are there. And so the advantage that you have with concealed carry is you take away that tactical advantage that the murderer has. The murderer doesn't know who it is that they have to go after first. And even if you do have one person in uniform there who's armed, if you also have concealed carry people there, it makes that officer or that guard who's in uniform, their job safer, because it makes it riskier for the attacker, because the attacker knows that if they go try to take out that one person in uniform first, they reveal their position and they have to worry that somebody behind them or to the side might be able to go and stop them.
I had a shift last night for my law enforcement job, and I always cringe when my wife calls me and says, "Hey, can you stop and get milk?" I really don't want to stop at Walmart in my uniform. I mean, I'm better placed in my pajamas at Walmart than in my uniform, my law enforcement uniform. But yeah, I mean, that's spot on in that sense when it comes to them being the first target, the first one they shoot. The laws in New York State, they passed a bill banning body armor, ballistics vests, not hard armor, which is what the guy in Buffalo had. I'm in New York. That's where I live. And now New York State, they used that to pass the bill, which turned that into law, which didn't stop anything. With the new one they just passed, which is the CCIA, so Concealed Carry Improvement Act. I call it the Concealed Carry Idiocracy Act, actually. They added to it now, it's hard armor, so steel plates. And the entire state of New York is pretty much a gun-free zone now. These sensitive places that they put is like 20 different locations. You can't carry anywhere. You got to keep it in your vehicle on the public road or on a sidewalk. It's about the only place you can carry in New York as of September 1st. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Lott? Have you
well, I think
delved into that?
There are lots of things in the new New York law that make it likely to be challenged and successfully challenged. I think they just want to kind of delay the process for as long as they can. But, you know, things like looking at people's social media accounts and having an interview with people to see whether they're good people or not, they're kind of inviting challenges from, and, you know, all of Times Square is a gun-free zone. I thought Justice Thomas was pretty clear in his opinion that, you know, he said you just can't ban people in Manhattan. You just can't ban people because it's a crowded area. They ban it on public transportation. Just Governor Hochul just in the last week or so was saying that, can you imagine having somebody with a permanently concealed handgun on a subway or on a bus or something?
Yes, please.
We have lots of states that allow people to carry on public transportation. I know Illinois doesn't, and I'm sure there must be a couple others that don't. But if I was a reporter, I would have said, okay, look, we got like 22 million concealed carry permit holders in the United States. You got 25 constitutional carry states. So you have a lot more that actually carry. Can you give me examples of people who are legally carrying on public transportation who behaved improperly? Just one or two examples, because I think she'd have a very difficult time with all those tens of millions of people carrying to provide any real examples of problems that have occurred on public transportation.
Yeah.
So much of the gun control debate has always been about things that might possibly go wrong. But the thing is, we don't need to guess. We don't need to, hypothesize about these things. We have many decades of experience in many different states to go and look at, with tens of millions of people carrying. And you would think if it's a problem, it should be easy to go and point to, hundreds or dozens or at least a few cases of a person who's legally carrying improperly shooting other people, as she was implying. And I think she'd have a very difficult job providing any cases.
She actually said that she doesn't need any statistics.
Well, that's on another time. A local reporter from Albany, I actually wrote about this, asked her, permit holders seem to be very law-abiding. Why do you want to go and keep them from having guns? And as you say, in response, she said she didn't really need to have numbers. She just knew what needed to be done in order to protect people in New York. But you would think, if she's right, then it should be easy for her to provide numbers. And not only didn't she provide numbers then, she didn't provide numbers at a later date. I mean, she could have come back and said, okay. But what you find is that police are rarely convicted of any type of firearms-related violation. They're convicted of firearms-related violations at about 1/20th the rate of the general population. But concealed carry permit holders are convicted of firearms-related violations at about 1/12th the rate that police officers are. Yeah. So, I suppose
they are the law-abiding.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, the type of person who goes through the process to get a concealed carry permit, as the Albany reporter asked, she said, well, if you're going to go and do a mass shootings or something, why are you going to bother to go through the process of get a concealed carry permit? And the governor didn't have a response to that either.
Well, I'm looking on your website on crimeresearch.org, and you always have great reading material on there, some great articles. And one of them it says updated, compiling cases where concealed handgun permit holders have stopped likely mass public shootings. So perhaps Governor Hochul could enjoy, just a light read of some of your information and help change her opinion about those of us who are responsibly armed citizens. But tell us a little bit about that article, John.
The media just doesn't really cover very frequently cases where people who are legally carrying guns have stopped what otherwise would have been a mass public shooting. And, my own guess is that the entire debate that we have about guns would be very dramatically different if the media did a couple things. One is when it covered these mass public shootings, would mention that we've had yet another mass public shooting in a place where guns are banned. As we talked about earlier, they refused to do that. Those are the successful attacks. And then to give coverage to the attacks that aren't successful, because when these murderers pick targets where victims are able to go and defend themselves. I think if even once in a while where the successful attacks occurred, the media would say, and we've had yet another mass public shooting in a place where guns are banned, I think it would make a big difference. Instead, they cover things like what gun was used or how they think the person got a hold of the gun, facts which they're frequently wrong to begin with about. The other thing that I wish the media would do is fact-checking once in a while, where they claim that the United States is somehow unique in terms of mass public shootings. That's simply false. What people fail to do is to note that the United States has 332 million people in it right now, something around that. And you look at countries in Europe. There are lots of countries in Europe that have 3 million or 5 million or 8 million people. you got to adjust for population. Nobody's going to go and compare the number of murders in California or Texas, let's say, with Wyoming. Okay. What they're going to do is they're going to compare murder rates, murders per 100,000 people.
Right.
You really have to do the same thing with regard to countries that you're comparing. The most populous country in Europe is Germany. Since 2000, the United States has had 9 mass public school shootings where 4 or more people have been killed. Germany, for example, has had several. 1 in 18 people were killed, another 15 people were killed. You know, if you adjust for the fact that they're less than 1/4 the population that we have here in the United States, they actually have a higher rate of mass public school shootings than we have here in the United States. Finland has a population of about 5 million, 5.4 million or something like that. So, you know, you have to adjust. If they have a couple of school shootings, that's a lot on a per capita basis. But the media won't do any type of corrections there.
And it seems like the only thing we can do as members of the public who want more accurate reporting is to just turn off and tune out, because there's a whole economy around clicks and shares, right? And that sort of thing, watches on YouTube. And you know, the splashy headlines are the ones that draw us like a moth to the flame, and we just react and go and give them our time, our attention, our dollars. And I have no idea how to fix that, because we have to know what the other side says so that we can counter it. So every time we look and see what the other side says, we're giving them the clicks and the shares and so forth. Do you have any thoughts on that, John?
Well, I mean, it's the reason why I write the op-eds, the reason why I try to do media. You know, I kind of wish we had more money to hire PR people and stuff to try to go and break through. It's just very difficult to get the message out. But it's one of the reasons why I try to write op-eds in kind of more mainstream type outlets, you know, Newsweek or, you know, try to get things in other types of places, Real Clear Politics or whatever, to try to get the message out to people outside of the kind of the normal small bubble that people who support the right to self-defense are limited to.
Yeah.
So what I hear there, sir, is that people need to support your organization more so that you can do more of this. And we let you read all the negative stuff and you form an opinion for us to listen to. So we don't have to watch all that negative CNN and whatnot.
Support with your dollars. Crimeresearch.org. There's a donate button right on there, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, right at the top. Donate, right? Put your dollars where your values are. I did want to just kind of make a comment about this particular book, The Gun Control Myths, because the person that wrote the foreword for you on this is Andrew Pollack. And we were talking at the very beginning of this conversation about school murders, Uvalde, Texas school murders. Well, Andrew Pollack's daughter was killed in the murders that took place at a high school in Florida. And, you know, the perception out there, I think, is that if you have been a victim of any kind of violence, that immediately makes you hate guns, think that nobody should own a gun. And then hear this gentleman who has lost his most precious treasure, his daughter. He didn't take that route. He hasn't taken that route. And to the degree that he wrote the foreword of one of your books, and he wrote a book called Why Meadow Died. And his premise was not anything about firearms. It was about all of the school policies and the faking of the number of negative incidents and crimes that were happening on campuses and things of that nature. And again, if we go back to what gets reported, we'd never hear the other side, the deeper things. When you said that they'll talk about, the Buffalo shooter and Buffalo murderer. We try not to use the word shooter because I'm a firearms owner. I go shooting, right? But I'm a safe, responsible firearms owner.
Right.
They pick the most surface level things that they can think of to talk about and just pump out there instead of maybe some of the more underlying things. We're seeing a great degree of fatherless homes and antidepressant medications and, just all kinds of other things that are also present in these murderers. But why do we never hear about those things, John?
Well, because I think it's a rhetorical question. They have a narrative that they want to go and try to push. And the narrative is guns, guns, guns. If we can only get rid of guns, then these bad things won't happen. And, I'm sure it has an impact on people's perceptions. There's a reason why the Democrats keep pushing this, is because they think it's at least somewhat successful in doing it. But, to me, just the broader question of violent crime that we've seen going up the last couple of years, if you listen to Biden's speeches, his solution really is a gun-focused policy. I think few people would know from listening to his speeches, for example, that less than 8% of violent crime involves guns. The basic reason why violent crime has gone up is pretty straightforward, that you have large numbers of inmates in many urban areas. Over half, in some cases 2/3 of the inmates have been released from jails. You have police budgets being cut in New York City. They cut the police budget by $1 billion a year. Police have been restricted, have had their jobs become more difficult in many places. You have prosecutors who are refusing to prosecute violent criminals. And you have places like New York where they've had bail reform, where you have criminals who may be facing literally decades in jail if they get convicted are released on no bail. And the problem that you face there is that, take something like the Wisconsin Christmas parade murderer who ran his SUV into a crowd there, killing 6 and wounding something like 60 others. In that case, the guy had attempted the murder of the mother of his child with his car at that time, had other felonies that he was facing trial for. He was released on something like $1,000 bond. Here's the problem, and that is, if you're having somebody who may already be facing decades in jail if he gets convicted, what's the additional penalty? I mean, if the guy's 38, he's going to face decades in jail. It may effectively already be a life sentence that he's facing. You go and you release him with no bail, essentially. He goes and commits another murder. What are murder? What are you going to do? Give him a second life sentence? The first life sentence wasn't enough, but when you give him a second life sentence, or a third or fourth or a fifth life sentence, that's going to make the difference. And just in general, you're talking before about the types of the officer was talking about, like body armor and things like that. So the guy uses a steel plate, and there's some criminal penalty for that. I assume it's a couple of years or whatever in prison. If somebody dons a steel plate and does a mass murder, such as what motivated the legislation, is it really a 2-year additional prison sentence going to make the difference when he's already going to be facing multiple life sentences that are there? So he kills 10 people, facing 10 life sentences, but if you add an additional 2 years on for having the body armor, that will be what deters him from going and committing the crime.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll use that analogy with the 10 rounds, the 10-round magazine where they limited to 7 rounds for the SAFE Act here in New York. And I said, I don't know any bad guy that's only going to put 7 rounds in their 30-round magazine before they go rob a bank. It just, they've already made the decision to rob a bank, which is a higher crime. They could care less. New York, it's even in New York State prison systems. They got a new Humane Alternatives to Solitary Confinement Act. It's called the HALT, where they're not allowing people to be in solitary confinement for too long. And then when they come out, they get it wiped like it never happened. I got relatives and friends that work in the prison system, and it's bleeding through all aspects of our society. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, sir, is what your thoughts are on, it's clearly unconstitutional with what New York State has put forward after the Supreme Court's ruling. If this goes up again and gets struck down, the new law, because they can't go back and say, well, they disobeyed the SCOTUS ruling, pushing forward a new lawsuit now. If that gets struck down, what's to stop New York from doing it again? I mean, the only alternative I can see is vote them out, but we're in New York, so that's not going to happen. The Democrats are going to be in power from now until the end of time. Is there any other that you know of, experience you've run across that we could do to try to get them in line so they stop just,
Well, I mean, obviously they're just doing this to delay the inevitable here, but I think if they show bad faith, at some point, the courts would just say, "Okay, we take it away from you, and we set up the rules that are going to be there," and it may be something that they're going to be very upset about. So, I don't know. Look, there are 43 right to carry states. Well, actually more than that, because a few states like Maryland and Massachusetts and even California have gotten rid of, the good cause, the proper cause provision there.
Yep.
So, but, the 43 states that have had this for some period of time, when they adopted these rules, there was all sorts of anguish, all sorts of calls about disasters that were going to be happening, extremely similar, essentially the same as what Governor Hochul has been saying. And yet, 6 months or a year after the laws went into effect, it became a non-issue because even people in the media realized that the types of fears that were being brought out just didn't happen. And you're going to have the same thing happening in New York. They're going to lose the credibility just as they have in all these other states. Hopefully, it'll be a learning experience for the media centers in New York City and Los Angeles. But I think beyond that, you have a situation where they just want to go and push this until after the election. Gotcha. They got elections coming up right now in New York, and they just want to delay it. It's going to maybe one of the reasons why they have the law go into effect in September 1st. So it's closer to the election. It's less likely anything's going to happen before the election in terms of any type of court action that's there. And because otherwise it's hard for me to understand why they just do this delaying, why they go, but they do it time after time. Look, I'll give you one simple fact, and that is of all the states that have moved to right to carry laws, none has had even a legislative hearing on imposing these proper cause or these good reason type provisions. None has voted for that. You would think if the types of fears that are being brought up in New York and other places were valid, you'd at least have some, because all you have to do is have a bill put up. Yeah. You think you'd have one gun control advocate in the state legislature in one of these states that would have not gotten the message and put up a bill like that. But they haven't had a hearing, let alone a vote on let alone passing a law that would cause them to go back and impose these, good reason type provisions that are there.
Right.
And, I think that tells you a lot about how these become non-issues. And yet time after time, Democrats and gun control advocates still keep on declaring disaster is going to happen when these laws get passed.
You know, they always say blood in the streets. It's going to be blood in the streets if we have constitutional carry. It's what they kept saying here in Arizona. Now we've had constitutional carry for how long? And it has made us a safer state. Go ahead, John.
Right. Well, you know, the media doesn't seem to really look at what happens in other states. Look, in Ohio, I testified on 3 different occasions before they adopted their right to carry law. The first time, I think it was just Pennsylvania and Indiana had right to carry laws. By the third time I testified, all the states surrounding Ohio had a right to carry law. And, you know, during the first time I testified, they said, well, you know, people in Ohio are different than Indiana or Pennsylvania. Obviously, that wasn't very credible. But by the time you get to the last, you know, time I testified there, and all the surrounding states, West Virginia, Kentucky, Michigan, as well as Indiana and Pennsylvania, had right to carry concealed handgun laws. You know, what are you going to say? Are people in Ohio afraid to leave the state in any direction? Do they really think that they're taking their lives in their hands to leave the state in any direction? I remember I did a TV debate with a legislative opponent of the bill the last time I testified. And the host, after I brought up the point about all the other states having it, the host asked him, he said, well, you know, have these other states had the type of bad consequences that you're claiming? And he says, no, but they haven't had any benefits. And you could just tell the host, who was on like public television, he was a liberal guy, but you could just tell it was kind of like, and that's the best the opponents can have, is that they claim that there's no effect from these laws, and that's the reason why they oppose it. That at that point, you know, you could tell even the opponent kind of realized that he didn't really have anything to go on at that point. You could just see from his body language and his reaction that he realized he didn't really have a good comeback for the person. You know, the same thing happens with constitutional carry, with concealed carry, that as more places adopt these rules, it gets more and more difficult to go and claim the types of predictions of disaster that they do. And I think it had an impact on the Supreme Court. I think one of the reasons why the Supreme Court, Thomas's decision, came down as hard as it did is we got 43 states that have right to carry type rules. And, you know, I think if we'd only had 10 or 5 or something like that, it would have been a very different decision.
People are uneducated on firearms in the general sense of the things, and politicians are, you know, they're going on emotion with stuff like this, whether it's an active killer event or whether it's the Supreme Court ruling. They're using emotion to try to drive these. In their sense, they're calling them, you know, common sense, and in our sense, we think common sense is everybody should be armed and the bad guy, you know, be damned if they try to hurt us. Do you feel? I always tell people that it's two sides of it. It's either one, they're really uneducated politicians and they really are scared or don't know about guns, and those are the politicians I try to meet with and educate. Or the flip side of it is they really don't like guns and they don't want anybody to have guns because they don't want them to be an uprising against their rule and the laws they put forth. Those are really the two sides of the teeter-totter that I see. What are your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, I think facts and numbers matter a lot, but I think for the vast majority of people, they get their information from the media. And if you constantly hear about bad things that happen with guns and almost never hear about the benefits, I think it has an impact on people's perceptions. You know, so you see a crime that occurs with a gun, and if the only thing you ever hear about are bad things with guns, you never hear about defensive gun uses, for example, then you figure, well, if we can only get rid of the guns, those bad things won't happen. And they don't think of the negative consequences in terms of people not being able to own and use guns defensively. We did a report last year that looked at the first 9 months of last year in terms of news coverage. You look at something like the largest 5 newspapers in the United States, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. Between them, they had something like about 2,600 news stories about gun crimes where people were killed or injured. By contrast, between those 5 newspapers, they had a total between all 5 of them of 10 defensive gun use stories. And most of those had something go wrong. You know, the person using the gun shot the wrong person, or the gun was taken away from them and used against them. Not very typical cases. Of course, if you add in CNN and MSNBC, you get like 0 defensive gun use stories on those broadcasts. And so somebody could think, look, I'm a well-read person. I follow the news closely. You know, I read the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I watch CNN and MSNBC. And so if they only hear about bad things that happen with guns and never hear about the benefits, is it really surprising that they have the views that they do? So we looked at all the news stories we could find in the United States during those 9 months. And there was like, I can't remember, there's something well over 1,000 defensive gun uses that had occurred that got news coverage. The thing is, and most of those are kind of outside the major media markets. The thing is, when you look at the breakdown, most of those news stories involve cases where the attacker was killed. Next close by was cases where the attacker was wounded. And only about 4% of the defensive gun use news stories involve cases of brandishing. And most of those involve cases where the criminal is held at gunpoint until police arrive. Now, here's the problem, and that is we know the vast majority, about 95% of defensive gun uses involve brandishing. So, but they only 4% of the news stories. And it's pretty clear what's happening. If you have 2 stories, in one case there's a dead body on the ground, and in another case, let's say a woman's brandished a gun, the would-be attackers run away, no crime committed, you're not even sure what crime would have been committed, gun's not fired. You're an editor of a paper. Which story are you going to run with? My guess is you're more likely to run with the story of the dead body on the ground. If it bleeds, it leads.
That's it.
But the thing is, while it's understandable what makes something newsworthy, you know, if we care about policy, in terms of what saves the most lives, we care about both types of stories that are there. And so, you know, 4% of their coverage is actually 95% of the stories. And of course, they wouldn't even cover them even if they got them. Most of the defensive gun use stories, even when they involve somebody being shot, don't get news coverage. There are a couple places like Houston, where the police department literally puts out a press release every time somebody's been killed, even if they've been killed with the defensive gun use. And, you know, the number of releases that they have, Houston makes up a huge percentage of the defensive gun use stories nationwide. Not because they get more defensive gun use is occurring there, it's just because of how the police department there covers it compared to other places. And you know, Dallas used to be the same way. But you know, the thing is, facts matter. People get their facts in lots of different ways. And I have to confess, I was affected by the media coverage as much as anybody else before I started doing my research, 2.5 decades ago. I was probably in the middle of the gun control debate because I thought, you know, most these crimes rarely involve successful uses of guns for people to defend themselves. And there are lots of crimes. We all get deluged with them. And another example of the media impact is the perception that the United States is unique in terms of mass public shootings, a point Cheryl raised earlier. And I can understand why the media covers a mass public shooting in the United States a lot more than it covers a mass public shooting in Germany, let's say, or some other country. But, it has a real impact on the debate because constantly legislators, politicians are making the claim that we're unique. Now, I wish the media was at least somewhat unbiased and would go and not just look for whatever one claim that they can find out there to go and prove the narrative that's there. But, they're not really interested in that. And so we've collected those stories. It still doesn't seem to impact them very much. But my guess is if people knew how frequently mass public shootings occur in other countries, including, Western European countries. I'll give you one example. If I were to just only Western Europe and the United States, because mass public shootings are much more common in Eastern Europe. They're even more common outside of Europe, but just Western Europe and the United States. Since 2010, could you tell me where the two worst mass public shootings have occurred? Between just the United States and Western Europe, where have the two worst mass public shootings occur?
Well, I'm never going to match my wits against yours when this kind of
I'm not asking. No, but I mean, these
Western Europe.
Western Europe.
I mean, was it the Paris thing?
Paris was the worst. 130 people were murdered, shot to death in November 2015. That's the worst. Do you know where the second worst one was? It's in Norway. About a decade ago. If you ignore the bombing deaths, you had 67 people on that island, young people who were murdered there, being shot to death. And so, but most people wouldn't know that. And I talk to people all the time, and they can't answer the question. They don't even get what Cheryl said about the one in Paris. I've gotten calls from people in Germany, reporters who say, what is it about the United States and school shootings? And I'd say, well, what about Germany? What about these school shootings that we've had in Germany? And that if you look at a per capita rate, Germany has a higher rate than we have here in the United States. And, it just kind of the conversation ends at that point.
Well, the media is like having a funhouse mirror in your home. And that's the only mirror you own, right? The only mirror you ever look into. And follow me with this, my little analogy here. If I go against a law in some way, or if I commit a crime, from what I understand, there is no such thing as the I didn't know defense, right? I am responsible for knowing. But yet we pass laws and we create cultures and we divide families over the image that we see in the funhouse mirror. And our only real defense that people would have is, well, I didn't know that there was a crimeresearch.org out there. Well, why? We are in the age of information, people. Right? How could you not be curious enough to look beyond the funhouse mirror of CNN to realize that there are other sources of information?
Well, Google has shadow banned our website, and others have done similar types of things.
Which that needs to be a lawsuit too.
No, well, anyway.
Everything costs money.
But that's one reason why I do shows like yours, to help get out the information.
Before you leave us, John, what is your most recent book, since I've been the Vanna White of your books today on the show?
Well, Gun Control Myths is the most recent one.
Gotcha. Very good. And just briefly, we were chatting on the phone recently, and I was saying how I was encouraged to see you weigh in on some of the craziness with the elections, our past election. And I was like, wow, that's really nice and cool that you are, using your knowledge and your weight of, prestige to be able to kind of comment on that. And you said, well, matter of fact, I wrote a book on that, and totally caught me flat-footed.
Well, I don't know about a book, but I've done a lot of research. I've written dozens of peer-reviewed academic articles on voting by regular voters and by politicians over the decades. A lot of my academic research was on that area. And back in 2000, I was a statistical expert for USA Today on the 2000 election. I wrote the minority report for the US Civil Rights Commission on the 2000 election. And I've been involved in a number of vote recounts over the years. So this is, people can see my latest research at, if they go to the Social Science Research Network, SSRN, and just look under Lott. You'll see the very first paper that comes up is my most recent research that I've done on this.
Well, we appreciate you coming on, sir, for sure. It's definitely been a wealth of knowledge, and hope to have you back again sometime. Maybe we can get you on one of the live shows, and we can have people queue in with questions and stuff and such.
Okay. Well, thank you for your service, and I appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much.
Problem.
Okay.
There's a lot of sponsors that make this show possible, like Mantis.
Make sure you check them out and give them your business.
This episode is brought to you by Mantis. Mantis X helps shooters suck less. Next Level Training, the makers of the SIRT pistol. TheGunFood.com, your online source for ammunition. Mountain Man Medical, the right medical training and gear should be accessible to every American. Meet the Pressers is also generously supported by other fine companies, ranges, and our Patreon members. Thank you.
Thanks for watching or listening to our show.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share. Click that little bell thingy so you know when the next episode's uploaded. Support us on Patreon. Come to one of our classes. Host us to come to you and do one of our classes at your location.
And until next time.
Adieu.
Thank you for watching Meet the Pressers.